They're all on. They're all on. They're all on, Renee.
Are they?
Yeah.
Unless they come up here and turn it off.
Okay, because as a rule, we always leave them off until they say something.
Yeah, I think they're used to us having them on, and yeah.
Okay, you got it.
Right, well, you're used to us having them on.
Yeah. Morning, Nate. Good, and you? Good.
Morning.
Nate, how are you? Morning, sir. Thanks again.
$1.25 bucket of gravel. $1.25? Yeah. All right. Is that good enough?
Mr. Secretary, can you hear me? I was on the radio this morning and they asked us about the different spellings of our names, so I told them that you and I stand around and laugh about it all the time. I guess he can't hear me. Hey, how are you doing?
Travel's back.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it was. That's a little tough crowd. They had several of them jump in my face, and one of them came up to me and demanded to know something. I said, "Well, what is that?" He said, "Well, I must be misinformed." Yeah, you are misinformed, you idiot. Hi, David.
Oh, thank you. Is it all mostly Health District 4?
Yeah. Yeah. Health District 6 doesn't have any. And Pokey.
Nobody's writing a story about that. But now they want me to cover their insurance. Or us. I see that.
Recording in progress.
Good morning.
You ready?
Yep.
Board of Examiners come to order.
Governor and members of the board, for the record, all members are present. We have Governor Little, Attorney General Wasden, and then we have Secretary Denny's with us by video. Today on our Board of Examiners agenda, we have our consent agenda. We have items number 1 is our minutes from last month, from January. Item number 2 is from the Department of Administration. This is from the Division of Public Works. There are two recognition of assignments, and that is our consent agenda for today.
Governor.
General.
Move adoption approval of the consent agenda.
Second. I'm glad you're here, Mr. Secretary. Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed,
Aye.
nay. The ayes
Ayes have it. Consent agenda is not adopted.
Governor,
members of the board,
on our informational agenda, we have the overtime payments that have been paid for FLSA exempt employees from the health districts and from the state controller's office on the LUMA project. And then item number 4 is from the state insurance fund, and that concludes our agenda for today.
There's also item B. Okay, great. And Governor.
General.
Move adjournment.
Always, a motion to adjourn is always in order. Second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we are adjourned. We got a couple minutes, Sherry.
Thank you. Well, this morning I'm sitting up pretty high. I did today. My feet won't be swinging. Oh, isn't that groovy? Thanks. I kind of like this. Right? The thing that's dangerous is they don't have any handles. I know. I'll probably end up on the floor.
You ready, Director? Board of Land Commissioners come to order. Director Miller.
Governor, members of the board, good morning. This is the regular meeting of the State Board of Land Commissioners for Tuesday, February 15th, 2022. Tab 1, Attachment A, as always, timber sale transactions and activities here in the Director's Report. In January, the Department of Land sold 1 endowment timber sale at auction, as well as 1 G&A sale at auction. The endowment net sale value represents a 23% upbid over the advertised value, while the G&A sale represents a 6% upbid over the advertised value. Both sales had competitive bidding. As you can see, the Goat Creek sale did not sell last month, so we'll be looking to reappraise this particular sale, and we will offer it for a second time at a future auction. Total endowment sawlog volume sold in January was nearly 5.35 million board feet, which sold for close to $1.45 million and $271.02 a thousand. The G&A sale included 520,000 board feet and sold for $245,440 and $472 a thousand. Proposed timber sales for auction. As you can see in the next table, the department sold only 1 sale earlier this month. This is a 2.7 million board foot salvage sale for the Departments of Park and Recreation, and this is at McCroskey State Park in the northern part of the state. The bottom table is our volume under contract as of January 31st, 2022. The department currently has 174 active timber contracts. Total volume under contract is more than 536 million board feet, valued at nearly $139.3 million. And on to page 2. Table 1, Department timber harvest receipts, To date, this fiscal year, receipts have amounted to nearly $57 million. And as you can see, January brought in about $8.76 million, while February is projected to bring in about $9.2 million in timber receipts and interest. The next table is the status update of the FY 2022 timber sale program. The department has either sold or has in process nearly 190.3 million board feet of sawlog volume, or about 61% of the FY22 timber sales plan. The bottom graph on page 2 shows our cumulative harvest receipts. Current fiscal year to date for harvest receipts is 108% of the 3-year average. Moving to the next page, page 3, this is our cumulative harvest volume, of which we are currently at 115% of the 3-year average. The lower graph is our monthly lumber and stumpage price index. Governor and Land Board members, winter lumber production and transportation continues to affect the markets, as you know. And this is what a lot of folks have been talking about. Shortage of rail cars and trucks are also becoming a big problem. The situation at the Canadian border crossings has also had some impact. Additionally, traders expecting a longer downturn in prices were surprised by renewed strength in the market. So, again, Governor, we continue to ride this lumber roller coaster ride. The market for lumber for repair and remodeling is expected to grow by 5% in 2022, which is good news for the big box stores and home centers and helps drive demand for lumber and stumpage. Lumber use is forecasted to grow by 7% overall in 2022. Rising interest rates are likely to have some impact. Housing starts in 2021 exceeded 2020 by 21.3%, but the forecast for 2022 is relatively flat. So we will keep watching this. Finally, the 6-month average stumpage price for endowment timber is about 10% higher than this time last year. And of course, the map on page 4 gives you an idea of where our current sales are being advertised. So Governor and Land Board members, before I move on to attachment B, I will stop there for any questions.
Director, we've inquired a couple times about splitting out salvage versus green timber. What's our schedule to get that done?
Governor, we've talked about this. I'm going to ask Jim Elbin to come up and just give you a
I just want to know when we're going to do it.
Governor, we'll work on that for next month. We'll split that out. I will say that we do have some of our pricing. Like I said, we're up 10% in our stumpage pricing from last year. We've had some strong cedar sales that have been a part of these some of these salvage sales, so that has driven our pricing up. It's created more competition at auction, so we have seen some competitive upbidding despite the salvage sales. So we'll work on that and split that out, and what we'll do is have a conversation with your staff and Land Board staff on what that looks like ahead of time.
The variance on the last uptick and the other uptick, you attributed to the salvage sales, and that's why I thought we'd agreed that if we take the salvage sales off, that graph on the monthly lumber and stumpage price would be more accurate. Did I miss something?
Well, Governor, it's all, this is certainly the way we've reported on these as a whole. You haven't missed anything. Again, it all fluctuates given what type of sale we're looking at, and all the different variables that go into a particular sale. One month you have high cedar sales. One month
Can you unmute the chamber?
You have low valued sales. What we can do, I'll circle up with our trust lands folks, and we can demonstrate. Actually,
Sorry, Dustin, we just heard that they are muted outside of this room, so I just
oh,
wanted to
okay.
make sure we get things
Thanks, Bill. Governor, we'll circle up with our trust lands folks. What we can do is try to parse out 2 different graphs and see what that looks like moving forward.
Okay, very good, thanks.
Any further questions, Governor and Land Board members?
Controller, Renee, do we need to?
Governor, we should pause until we get the audio outside. So I'm suggesting that we do that.
Okay. No. We're not gonna do that. That'll be out of order.
Is that your birthday?
Yeah, that would be out of order. Chair rules.
Church birthday, everyone.
So are we willing to sing happy birthday and still suffer the consequences of being out of order?
You would be out of order. We back in business.
Okay.
All right.
Director.
Hey, Governor Land Board members, turning to
Page
page
one
one
of Attachment B,
endowment transactions, including leasing permits and real estate. Within the
Within the
Trust Land Management Division, as you can see in January, the Department issued a total of 10 instruments and granted 5 deeds. Jumping down to land exchanges, the Eastern Idaho Solid Waste District. Land exchange is scheduled to close by the end of February. So we'll be reporting on that next month. And the Avamore Land Exchange. As I've reported earlier, the department has worked with attorneys on both sides to clear up a couple of title issues with this potential exchange, namely a Boise County ordinance that effectively changed the zoning of this parcel that the department would pick up in the exchange. We are told all issues, with the exception of this one, are currently resolved. If the Boise County Commissioners vote to vacate the ordinance on these lands on March 10th, then the department will proceed with seeking final approval from the Land Board on March 15th. And Governor Land Board members, what we're hearing right now is a high degree of confidence that order will be vacated. So we'll be, with any hope, any luck, we will be bringing that to you next month. On to page 2, this is our monthly fiscal year to date, Trust Land Management Division revenue through January 2022. Total income generated from leasing activities through the end of January was more than $4.7 million, which is just shy of $1 million more than where we expected revenue to be by the end of January. As I pointed out last month, significant updating on 2 recent sand and gravel leases resulted in a big boost in revenue in the minerals category to the tune of $835,000. Later in the meeting, I will be seeking approval from the Land Board to award these leases to the high bidders. Additionally, as I reported last month, Governor Land Board members, the significant boost in real estate services income is related to approximately $1 million from the disposition of the University of Idaho College of Agricultural Land in Caldwell last fall. We'll be hearing from the university here shortly during the information agenda. On to page 3, Cumulative Trust Lands Program Receipts. This does not include timber. This graph reflects how we compare against the 3-year average for leasing receipts, which we are about 125% of the 3-year average thus far this fiscal year, again because of a boost in both the minerals income and the real estate services income. And on to page 4.
Governor, for a quick question. The Director.
Controller.
Thank you. Back on, I don't know which page 2 that has the Trust Land Management Division and the receipts and expected. On the real estate services, and this somewhat will apply later on, and if it's better to wait till the U of I's presentation. But on these real estate services, for example, the $600,000 that I believe CDH or Corey Barton was required to pay or lost because of his thing and how that all took place in the auction. Does that go into this particular area of the real estate services and that, or does that go into the land bank fund that would be part of those $600,000? I guess where does that go to?
Thank you, Governor and Mr. Controller. This goes $600,000. I'm looking at Bill. I think the $600,000 of the failed sale to Corey Barton goes into our earnings reserve account, and he gave me a thumbs up, so that's good. And the rest of that money was that 4% buyer's premium from the actual purchaser of the property. So,
thank you.
So that was my question too. Dustin, so that basically 1.1 million accrues to the beneficiary and is not income. You're looking for somebody to give you a head fake.
And that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to verify, as I was saying, yes, seeing the head nods out there in our Trust Land folks. Governor, if there's no further questions, the status of permanent fund revenue and royalties on page 4, I'm sorry. As you can see on this graph, so far, nearly $1.58 million has been deposited into the permanent fund this fiscal year, and currently we are tracking well ahead of the 3-year average. Last month I mentioned the increase in production in both the ideal eastern and southwest areas, which has attributed to the increase in royalties deposited into the permanent fund. Governor, if there's no further questions there, I will move on to the legislative summary. Okay.
Continue.
Tab C in your materials is that brief 2022 legislative summary to date. All IDL rules, including the omnibus fee and non-fee rules, have passed both the House and Senate Natural Resources Committee. So, Governor, I guess we shall see what happens next. I don't know if you have any guesses on that. But you will be hearing from Scott Phillips in a little bit regarding action needed on next steps here moving forward. Additionally, both IDL and EFIB both had their time before JFAC on January 21st. I think I was up there for about an hour and 15 minutes. But we made it through just fine. So far, so good. We've been having all the right conversations with folks, and budget setting is scheduled for February 28th. And just a brief update on a couple of IDL bills. House Bill 468 adds to existing law to provide for certain notices regarding restrictions on endowment trust lands and an infraction level penalty to be assessed for damage done to endowment land by an individual. The bill was introduced in the House Natural Resources and Conservation Committee. Conversations with legislators and stakeholders are ongoing at this time, and a hearing has not been scheduled yet. House Bill 588, this is our Wildland Firefighter Hazard Differential Pay bill. This was introduced in the House Commerce and Human Resources Committee last week, and a hearing is currently pending on that particular piece of legislation. And you can see the other various pieces of legislation that we're currently involved with and monitoring and having conversation on. So, Governor, if there's no questions there, we can move on to tab D.
Questions?
Continue.
Okay. Tab D, Resource Protection and Assistance Reports. I'm going to bring up Mick Thomas, Division Administrator for Minerals, Navigable Waterways, and Oil and Gas to present.
Mr. Thomas.
Good morning, Governor and members of the Land Board. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. For the record, my name is Mick Thomas, Division Administrator over Minerals, Navigable Waters, and Oil and Gas. Item 1D in your binder, page 1, is the Resource Protection and Assistance Bureau Biannual Report. The Navigable Waterways Program administers lake encroachment permits and submerged land leases, while our Minerals Program oversees mine reclamation plans, dredge and placer permits, and abandoned mine land projects. Funding for the Navigable Water Program is provided through a dedicated account, while the Mineral Regulatory Program is enabled through a mix of general and dedicated funds. Regarding the Navigable Waterways Program, Table 1 shows the encroachment permits have increased over the past 8 years, while the active submerged leases are relatively stable. Remember that the last column is only for the first half of fiscal year 2022 ending in December. Later this morning, you'll meet our newest member of the division. Lauren Moore joined us on November 1st, 2021 as the Navigable Waterways Program Manager. Lauren has a master's in environmental engineering and previously served the state at the Department of Environmental Quality. The RPA Bureau works with area offices to coordinate inspections and other on-site activities. We are happy to report that the area staff have conducted 121 inspections and are completing those reports currently. There were 90 permit violations found, and those in the area offices are working with permittees to resolve those violations. Turning to the top of page 2, the department has been working with contractors over the last 2 years to bring their winter dock storage areas into compliance. A lease has been signed for the Cougar Bay storage area. Public meetings for the remaining 3 storage areas were held in July of 2021, and leases for those remaining sites are going through the signature process right now. For Nav Waters, the administrative hearing caseload continues to tick up year over year. For the first half of fiscal year 22, the department ordered 4 public hearings and 4 contested case hearings on encroachment permit applications. Of these 8, 4 were approved, 1 denied, 2 pending, and 1 vacated. Finally, IDAPA 200309 was approved as a pending rule before the 2022 legislature. Rulemaking packet was prepared for the session. For the remainder of fiscal year 22, the NAV Water Program seeks to resolve the remaining violations identified in 2021, increase the inspection volume, and set a 2-week timeline for completion of the inspection report and follow-up actions taken after completion. We also plan to begin negotiating rulemaking for IDAPA 200317. I'll present that topic later as a regular action item at today's meeting. The rest of page 2 and top of page 3 shows that NAV Water generated nearly $428,000 during the first half of fiscal year 22. We continue to be 100% self-funded while outpacing our 5-year average for the period. It's worth note that the latter half of the fiscal year normally produces a little bit higher volume in revenue than the first half. So before I go on into the mineral regulatory, are there any questions regarding navigable waters?
Yeah, Mr. Thomas, I know you internally track basically pending permits, and you're staffing up to do that, but you might just think going forward so we can track with you, where we are in addressing pending permits. But
Thank you, Governor. The permits are processed, and the permits are processed as they're received. And so our best tracking mechanism is to look at year-over-year growth. And that's why we think, in general, springs are normally hotter or a little bit more productive than falls. But we don't have a mechanism now to say these permits may come out in March or April or May. Just they're processed as they're received by the applicant.
You receive a request and then you issue a permit. I'm just trying to see what the delta is between the two of them. How many? What's your inbox versus your outbox?
It's a good question. I'll track that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Any further questions? All right.
Just for a comment. Just appreciate your areas where they have the winter dock storage and appreciate their work in getting those contracts and things signed. I've had a lot of comments from different individuals up there, and so I appreciate having visited with Andrew Smith up at the area office and the update that he gave and that you shared here as well. So we appreciate the update.
Governor, Mr. Controller, thank you very much. It's an area effort, and honestly, we wouldn't be able to do it very well without Mr. Wasden's team. So thank you very much. Again, switching to mineral regulatory, the department is in different stages of mine review for some large mines across the state. We are working through an interagency review with our state and federal partners on Perpetua's Stibnite Gold project, and a supplemental EIS is currently being prepared. A final EIS, and that's an environmental impact statement, on Idaho Husky 1 Dry Ridge Phosphate is expected later this year. And Conex Resources is working on a U.S. Forest Service operations plan for their copper mine near Mackay. The department is continuing to grow in our use of the Reclamation Cost Estimator tool, broadly used by industry, the BLM, and some other states. The estimator allows the department to compare the reclamation estimates and data provided by operators against industry standards. Table 2 at the top of page 4 breaks down the department's current reclamation plan numbers by area then category, while Table 3 provides historical numbers over the past 10 years. Turning to page 5, Table 4 outlines the reclamation plans for primarily aggregate and dredge and placer permits administered by the state. The infusion of federal dollars into infrastructure development, combined with Idaho's growth, should keep the aggregate industry strong in our state for the years to come, at least the near future. Table 5 and 6 provide a snapshot of bonding for our larger, more complex mines and a summary of our bond assurance fund billing for the first half of fiscal year 22. A graph of our bond assurance fund data is shown at the top of page 6. Moving further down that page, you'll see our data showing the status of IDL's Abandoned Mine Lands Fund. The fund receives 34% of the 1% mine license tax, excluding sand and gravel, excluding oil and gas. It's received just over $4,200 in the first 6 months of fiscal year 22. AML projects are listed in Figure 7. At the top of page 7, you'll see our AML funding chart that tracks income and spending since 2014. The department is taking steps to preserve this fund through ongoing reductions in capital outlay and personnel cost. We're also monitoring potential funding sources. A large abandoned mine land bill is being developed by the Department of Interior. However, currently it looks like the final version of the bill is only going to fund abandoned mine lands projects associated with coal mining, and with the remainder going toward oil and gas plugging. Idaho doesn't have coal mines. We don't have the need for oil and gas plugging since we so accurately track those wells. Thank you for your time today. A little plug. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions? So the Triumph mine, there's money proposed in the budget to do some remediation on that. Will that lessen our liability for Triumph?
Governor, members of the Land Board, that's a good question. We asked for spending authority for the Triumph mine in anticipation of receiving federal funds for that reclamation. Currently, that isn't going to pan out. Now, there is a bill, a bipartisan bill moving through the Senate right now, sponsored partially by Senator Risch and Crapo, that may provide some funding through, not funding, but may enable Good Samaritan reclamation on some of these mines. It's a pilot project. I think they're anticipating max 15 projects nationwide.
Is the new change from all abandoned mines to coal mines, is that statutory or is that regulatory from the department?
Governor, specifically, you're asking about the spending authority that we're asking for?
No, the issue of when we initially thought there was going to be revenue funding there for us to take care of some of our pending doom over running out of money in our abandoned mines fund. Was that a change that was in ARPA or CARES or the infrastructure bill? I know it wasn't CARES, or was it guidance from Treasury and the department?
The money coming that we anticipated that eventually didn't happen was a part of the IIG, the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act.
Well, let me do a little mission work on that and see if I can.
Thank you.
If you get Nate the details of it, I'll see if I can talk to Mitch Landreau about it. So
thank you, Governor. Members of the Land Board, will do.
Questions?
Governor.
General.
Just wanted to make a record that about the midpoint in the director's report, we were informed that there was not audio on some of the exterior internet listening. We paused until that was restored. The director's report is not an item on which we take an action, so it's not an action item. It is simply a report. I understand that there's a recording of that so that citizens could get a complete copy of that. There's also documents that would be available that would enlighten folks as to the director's report. I just wanted to make a record that there was no action taken and none need be taken here.
Renee will get that into the minutes. Thank you, General. Thanks, Mick.
Hey,
Governor, Land Board members.
Governor,
if you'd like me to repeat everything I said.
No.
Okay. On to the I will spare you. On to the consent agenda. Tab 2 in your binder, the results of the January 6, 2022 mineral lease live auction. And I will take this one. The department received applications for two new sand and gravel leases located south of the Boise Airport within the IDL Southwest area. Pursuant to Idaho Code 58310 and Department procedure, public auctions were advertised and held to determine the high bidder for each lease. Live auctions were held, like I said, January 6, 2022, where the department determined the high bidder for both leases in accordance with existing statute, rules and procedures. As has been reported, there was significant upbidding for both leases. ASG Resources LLC submitted the successful premium bid of $500,000 for mineral lease E600-102, which is a 78-acre parcel, and Central Paving Company LLC submitted the successful bid of $335,000 for mineral lease E600-103, which is a 62.6 acre parcel. Both leases included a 10-year term for the extraction of sand and gravel, including annual rent of $250 and a minimum annual royalty payment of $7,500. Attachment 2 in your binder summarizes the results of the live auctions. Pursuant to Idaho Code 58.310 subpart 4, the land board has the right to reject any bid made at live auction where fraud or collusion are present or for any reason at the sole discretion of the land board. As indicated above, the department completed the lease auction process in accordance with existing statutes, rule, and procedures, and did not observe any indication of fraud or collusion related to this process. Governor and land board members, the recommendation is to direct the Department of Lands to award mineral lease E600-102 to ASG Resources LLC and mineral lease E600-103 to Central Paving Company LLC, and I will stand for any questions.
Director, what do we get per yard for the gravel?
Governor, I'm glad you asked that question because I looked that up just before. I guess you were, I figured you were going to ask me that. Governor, it's what I found is $1.15 per loose cubic yard, or 75 cents per short ton. So $1.15 per loose cubic yard is what we're charging.
Thank you. Next.
Governor, tab 4 in your binder, just the approval of the draft minutes from January 18th, 2022. I'm sorry, Governor, I skipped one.
You got a disclaimer in between.
I'm moving ahead. Tab 3 in your binder, disclaimer of interest request D1700-262. This is French Quarter Farms LLC on the Snake River. Lauren Moore is our new program manager for Nav Waterways, as Mick introduced her earlier, so we will bring her up to present on this. Sorry, Lauren, I was speeding through the agenda as quickly as the governor likes me to, and I overlooked you. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Right. Good morning, Mr. Governor, members of the board staff. Lauren Moore, I serve as the Navigable Waterways Program Manager. Today I'd like to present for your approval a disclaimer of interest. The purpose of this disclaimer is to clear title to land parcel along the Snake River. This property overlooks the Snake River from the top of the canyon, so there's a several 100-foot drop down to the river below. You can pull up the map that's attached. So I'll give you a bit of history. Back in the early 1900s, when surveyors first established the meander line of the river, and that's shown in green on the map, they placed that line on the rim of the canyon. And oftentimes these surveys did not include a field inspection. This was done remotely. So our field office has correctly determined the ordinary high water mark of the river that's shown in purple on the map. And of course, the state owns the beds and banks of all navigable waters below the ordinary high water mark. We would like to correct these parcel boundaries by disclaiming 35.475 acres of land to the upland property owners. That's French Quarter Farms LLC. And the landowner will then grant back to the state a parcel of land below the ordinary high water mark, totaling 0.233 acres, as well as a 25-foot easement in the event that we choose to pursue a public use right-of-way along the river. Thank you. I'll stand for any questions you have.
I've got a couple questions. Do we maintained an easement? Do we have access to that easement? Does the public have access to that easement?
Governor, we do not at this time. The idea is that these disclaimers are voluntary, and when we collect these easements from parcels along the river, eventually we can string them together in the event that we can use that public use right away.
If somebody can get ingress and egress to the easement to utilize the easement. And then I guess I looked this company up. They've been in existence for 1 year. We're basically giving them 35 acres of ground at $28 an acre in an area where real estate prices are quite elevated. I'm just to my fellow board members. I think we ought to talk about this going forward. I don't think most people in Idaho would think that 35 acres of prime riverfront property at $28 an acre is necessarily a good deal for the state of Idaho. So I just put that on the agenda at some time. And I know it's predicated on old code, but $1,000 doesn't hardly cover the administrative costs of doing this. So, Governor. General.
I was intrigued in this instance that the way the ordinary high water mark was originally plotted, however, was on top of a 200-foot cliff. And I don't think the river just ran up a cliff and went that way. Our claim to this property is that the ordinary high water mark. So factually, that is just not sustainable in any kind of action. So that's what we're doing in this instance, is we're making that correction. So that 35 acres or 39 acres, whatever it was, we would not factually be able to establish that that was in fact where the ordinary high water mark was. So that's kind of a unique element of this case.
But at a minimum, $1,000 doesn't cover our administrative costs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Governor, Land Board members now, tab 4, approval of the draft minutes from the January 18th, 2022 meeting.
Governor.
General.
Move adoption and approval of the consent agenda.
Move to second, we adopt the consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Consent agenda has been adopted.
Governor,
on to the regular agenda. Tab 5 in your binder, Endowment Fund Investment Board Report. We moved Chris to the regular agenda, given the action needed on the asset allocation study update. So we'll kick it over to Chris to present those updates.
Thanks, Director Miller. Governor, members of the Land Board, good morning. January was a challenging month. Equity markets had their worst month since March of 2020, as strong labor markets and persistently high inflation led the Federal Reserve to accelerate their plans to unwind monetary support. The fund was down 4.4% for the month, which left us essentially a break-even fiscal year to date, down 0.2%. The Federal Reserve has communicated that they plan to begin steadily increasing interest rates starting in mid-March and shortly thereafter commence balance sheet reduction. Financial markets have currently priced in about 5 rate increases in 2022, and it's unclear how much of the balance sheet will be reduced during the year, but the current balance is close to $9 trillion. So those are the tools they have to fight inflation, both increasing rates and reducing the balance sheet. And time will tell what happens, but their plans certainly spook the market. Inflation uncertainty, rising bond yields, escalating geopolitical tension, particularly surrounding Ukraine, and the ongoing surge in the Omicron variant of COVID-19 all contributed to heightened market volatility. Growth in technology stocks were particularly hard hit during the month, with the NASDAQ falling over 9%, and at one point during the month it was down 15%. If you look at the back page of the investment report on page B, you'll see Sands Capital, Eagle Asset Management, WCM, our growth managers, were the ones that were particularly hard during the month and had the biggest impact on our performance. I guess the one ray of good news is the last couple days of the month, we saw the markets recover slightly, show some strength, primarily driven by greater than expected GDP growth. I think for the year, the GDP was up about 5.7%, and solid corporate earnings reports. So, the economy remains relatively strong, but people are worried that with the Fed increasing rates and trying to fight inflation, that will just slam the brakes on the economy. Through yesterday, through Valentine's Day, we're down about 1.3%. So we're down slightly more. However, today's a pretty strong day in the market. So I'd characterize this as being close to break-even fiscal year to date. In terms of reserves, we continue to be well reserved and in good shape for making our distributions to beneficiaries. And we have a board meeting this Thursday. With that, I'll stand for any questions on the investment report.
Questions? So how often do you review, does the Callan recommend and the board on the performance
given you told us last board meeting you were doubling up on sands or adding to it, at what point in time do you say maybe they're not the best large cap growth manager?
Governor, members of the land board. So Callan presents a quarterly performance report, and part of that report, we look at performance of all our managers, whether they're above or below their respective benchmarks. Certainly, the staff looks at that every day. We track performance daily. We generally tend to be pretty patient investors. We recognize that certain styles can go in and out of favor. But we're also, we know it's our fiduciary responsibility to do what's right for the fund. So if they're chronically underperforming, we'll change out a manager. I'd say at this point, it's 1 month in, it's too early to tell. Sands tends to be on sort of the hyper growth, the more aggressive end of the growth range. And so naturally, they're going to be down more than the growth index during periods of volatility.
Further questions?
Governor, maybe a follow-up on the governor's question, I guess. You put them on like a watch list, and then is there like as a governance structure at the EFIB that you say, we watch it for so many quarters or so many months? What do you have something set in governance structure that way of how you review or monitor?
Governor, Mr. Controller, members of the board, we don't have a hard line that says if you underperform for 2 or 3 quarters, but we're regularly discussing it. There are factors besides performance that can also trigger removal of a manager. If they change their management team, they do other things. So it's not a rigid formula, but certainly a diligent process where we keep a close eye on all of our managers.
Further questions? Continue.
So moving to the next item on the agenda, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Governor. So Section C, moving to the red item. So one of the things we noted when both the Department of Lands and EFIB updated the land board's investment policy statement in November of 2021, we noticed, as you'll see on attachment 1, that because the financial assets had a large gain in the last fiscal year and over time, that the financial assets were approaching the upper end of the target asset allocation range that Callan had identified in 2014 when they developed this policy. Similarly, the timberland was close to the lower end of the range. So when we noted that, we went back and reviewed our policies, and the plan that was put together in 2014 when Callan was first engaged indicated that approximately every 8 years we should review the asset allocation, take a look at expected risk and return for the portfolio, the combined whole trust portfolio. And I think given the timeline and given where we're at in the asset allocation, we believe it's appropriate to consider updating this policy. Because of that, we went to Callan, we saw a proposal, which is included in attachment 2 for your consideration. I believe James Van Hewitt from Callan is participating in this meeting via Zoom if there are any questions on Callan's proposal. But our recommendation to the board for consideration is that we do engage Callan to update the strategic asset allocation.
Chris, the proposal here says that we agreed on valuations of timberland rangeland, $45 an acre for rangeland, $1,600 an acre for farmland, and about $1,560 an acre for timberland. Are those hard numbers? And then also, of course, the big issue is inflation is predicated in this, is put into this formula 2.25. What all is on the table for $40,000?
Governor, I'll answer that to the best of my ability, and Director Miller or Deputy Director Higginson may speak to that specific question. But it's my understanding that during the summer, we did update both timber and rangeland values based on an income approach. So I don't think we had full appraisals using multiple valuation methods, but we did use an income approach to try to bring those values closer to market. And they may have more to add on that if that's appropriate.
Director?
I'm looking at Bill. I don't think we have anything to add on that. I think Chris covered it well. So,
well, my only thought, and I mean, we need to do this. We've got a policy. We do it every 8 years, and it's 8 years since we did it last time. But if you're building it
based on income approach, and we're having auction sales that show that we're, and other things that show that our income approach doesn't come anywhere close to what the fair market value is. Do we need to have that discussion before we implement this? The old cart in front of the horse question. And it's probably not for you, it's probably for us strategically as a board. But if you don't have, and I assume Callan will look at the inflation number, because that's strictly a financial forecasting number.
I believe that is correct. Yes, Governor.
My fellow board members, my only thought on this is an action item is, do we need to collectively as a board have a discussion about fundamentals with this studies, because Callan's going to ask his bidding is no bid contract, $40,000 to do it on some numbers that may not be 100% accurate. Of course, you'll never get it. It's forecasting. You don't get 100% accuracy, but that's my only question to the board.
And Governor, I think that the conversation would be appropriate. On the issue of a no bid contract, my understanding is that was covered in the contract with Callan. So I would actually like to pose that question just so we clarify that. Just so that we're not caught off.
I don't think it's Chris's.
I can add, Governor, Mr. Attorney General, I can add, certainly, I'm certainly not an attorney, but my understanding was the land board first engaged Callan in 2014, and then in 2019, both the land board and EFIB went out to bid for consulting services. 11 companies provided proposals, really the top consulting firms. And in fall of 2019, we re-engaged Callan. In terms of the land board contract specifically, because a lot of the heavy lifting had been done during those interim years, we reduced the scope of their services. So they were re-engaged in fall of 2019. But there was a significant reduction in their fees from approximately $130,000 a year to $50,000 a year, with the understanding that under that contract, they could be reappointed for special projects such as this project.
So my understanding is that that's the process that we have gone through, and so therefore there's not really a no bid. It is actually part of what we have previously done, correct?
Yes, sir.
Kind of.
Any
other questions?
No more questions, so are we ready for a motion then?
Yes, we are. Motion's always in order.
Governor, I would move that we direct the Endowment Fund Investment Board and the Department to utilize the Land Board's General Consultant Callan to update the asset allocation study.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion. I will be voting no on this motion. So, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Are you and I? Mr.
Aye.
Okay, I'm a no, so Renee, if you'll record that. Kate, thanks, Mr.
Thank you, Governor.
Okay,
Governor, Land Board members, on tab 6, negotiated rulemaking for IDAPA 2003-17, rules governing leases on state-owned submerged lands and formerly submerged lands. So Mick Thomas is up to present this.
Mr. Thomas.
Good morning again, Governor and members of Land Board staff. The question before the Land Board will be this morning, should they authorize the IDL to initiate negotiated rulemaking for IDAPA 2003-17, rules governing leases on state-owned submerged lands and formerly submerged lands? This rule establishes the process by which people may obtain authorization for specific encroachments on state-owned submerged lands. It also establishes the process for collecting annual rent for their use. These uses typically include marinas, community docks, non-navigational encroachments, and oversized private docks, which occupy the state's lakes. Following Executive Order 2020-01, Zero-Based Regulation, this rule is scheduled to be repealed and replaced in 2022 for review during the 2023 legislative session. IDL has identified several sections of the rule that may be simplified to reduce the regulatory burden, word count, and the number of restrictive words used. In addition, preliminary research shows that a fee increase may be needed in order to cover the actual cost to process an application. Remember, funding for the management of the beds of navigable waterways comes solely from the fees and rents collected for managing these lands. These fees have not changed since 2008. Attachment 1 is a draft schedule of the rulemaking process, which includes at least 2 public meetings during negotiated rulemaking. In short, IDL is asking for authorization to comply with the Governor's Executive Order 2020-01 and initiate negotiated rulemaking for IDAPA 20-0317, rules governing leases on state-owned submerged lands and formerly submerged lands. With that, I'm happy to stand for questions.
Questions? Motion.
Governor,
General.
I move that we authorize the department to initiate negotiated rulemaking for IDAPA 20.03.17, rules governing leases on state-owned submerged lands and formerly submerged lands.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion, questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
Governor, quickly on to
Director.
tab 7, omnibus rulemaking, adoption of temporary rules. Scott Phillips is here, and he will present on this item.
Mr. Phillips.
Good morning, Governor, members of the Land Board. I'm Scott Phillips, the Policy and Communications Chief for the Idaho Department of Lands. This request to adopt all of IDL's administrative rules as conditional temporary rules is on today's agenda to ensure continuity of our administrative rules following the adjournment of the legislature. This request is tied to direction the department and all state agencies received from the Division of Financial Management. That's included in attachment 1 of your briefing materials. And unless reauthorized by the legislature, all administrative rules expire on July 1st. So by way of background information, IDL's rules are currently in place as temporary rules that became effective on July 1st, 2021. Per the Governor's Zero-Based Regulation Executive Order on October 19th, 2021, the Board adopted as pending fee rules IDAPA 200201, rules pertaining to the Idaho Forest Practices Act, and IDAPA 200309, easements on state-owned navigable waterways. These rules have been submitted to the 2022 Idaho Legislature for review. Then on November 16th, 2021, the Board adopted IDL's omnibus pending non-fee and fee rules. These rules have also been submitted to the Legislature for review. If IDL's rules are approved by the Legislature, the pending rules will become final rules. If not approved by the Legislature, which is likely, the administrative rules will expire upon adjournment of the 2022 session. And just to clarify, this request covers the previously approved rules under IDAPA 20 that are listed in attachment 2 of your briefing materials. And most of the 19 rule chapters included in IDAPA 20 fall under the authorities of the Land Board. However, IDAPA 20 does include rules for the Idaho Oil and Gas Conservation Commission and the Idaho Board of Scaling Practices. These boards will meet independently to consider whether to adopt their rules as conditional temporary rules. Under this agenda item, the board is not being asked to approve those commission's rules. If the agenda is approved, or this agenda item is approved by the board, we will submit the notices of adoption of temporary rules, the document included in attachment 2 of your materials, to DFM per their deadline. And in closing, IDL recommends that the board adopt as conditional temporary rules all of the department's administrative rules as set forth in attachment 2. These rules will become effective only if the pending rules are not otherwise approved or rejected by the 2022 Idaho Legislature. And with that quick report, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Questions? Very good. That is very exciting stuff.
I couldn't agree more, sir.
Governor,
General.
as convoluted as this may seem, I move that we adopt as conditional temporary rules all the department's administrative rules as set forth in attachment 2. The rules will become effective only if the pending rules are not otherwise approved or rejected by the 2022 Idaho Legislature.
Moved and seconded. Further questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Mr. Phillips.
Thank you.
You made that as painless as possible.
Okay, Governor, Land Board members, on to the information agenda. Good Neighbor Authority and Shared Stewardship update. Craig Foss, State Forester, is here, and he will introduce his staff that will be presenting today.
Thank you, Director. Good morning, Governor, members of the Land Board. For the record, my name is Craig Foss. I'm State Forester with the Department of Lands. Just a little bit of background to bring us up to speed with how we got to where we are today. In 2014, the 2014 Farm Bill authorized states to conduct analysis in partnership with the federal agencies of the condition of our national forests. IDL led that effort, and working with our partners, designated 1.8 million acres of forest land as at risk due to forest health or wildfire concerns. National forests were given the authority to add to that designation, and as of today, that designation stands at about 6.1 million acres. After that effort, then Governor Otter asked the Department of Lands how we might best engage to help address these restoration needs on our national forests. We investigated authorities in that farm bill, and we landed on the Good Neighbor Authority. With that authority, state agencies are able to use state resources and staff to work with our federal partners to achieve their objectives to increase pace and scale of restoration on our federal lands. In 2016, we hired our first staff person in Good Neighbor. John Songster was hired as a program manager. He was later promoted to bureau chief, and now we have 15 full-time employees and a dozen seasonals that are engaging that effort. And John will give an update on what's going on with Good Neighbor. Again, continuing on in 2018, then Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue unveiled the Shared Stewardship Initiative. It was further recognition of the need for restoration on our federal lands, and the recognition that it was really going to take folks working together to address the restoration needs on our federal lands. And so in December of 2018, right here with the Land Board, Idaho signed on to an agreement with our federal partners to engage the Shared Stewardship Initiative. In 2020, we hired Ara Andrea as the program lead or coordinator for Idaho's Shared Stewardship Initiative. Probably the biggest difference that we should all be aware of with Good Neighbor and Shared Stewardship. Good Neighbor really focuses on using state staffing and processes to address needs on federal lands. Shared Stewardship is all-encompassing. If you look at a landscape, you're going to have federal, state, industrial, and private land ownership. In order to impact that landscape, to treat that landscape, to protect communities from wildfire, and to address forest health concerns, we need to think across all land ownerships. And so shared stewardship is really all-encompassing. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ara and John. They'll give you an update as to where we're at with those programs and stand for any questions. Thank you.
Welcome.
Good morning, Governor Little, members of the Land Board. I'm Ara Andrea, and I am IDL's statewide Shared Stewardship Coordinator. We're going to start our progress report with a short video showing you some highlights of Good Neighbor Authority and shared stewardship work across the state. Shared stewardship, the cross-boundary work, the no boundaries forestry efforts are really the new way we're doing business. This is not just talk. This is really happening. The agencies are working very closely together. We're reaching out together to the landowners, and this is the way we're going to collaboratively work in the future.
We would like to try to thin the fire risk down and create an environment where we can actually have a fire that can go through this area but not enter into the canopy or the stand. And in order to treat the entire area properly, we have to cross the boundaries, and so everybody's involved.
And what we're actually trying to mitigate is the risk of severe damage.
I am Mcguire. I'm a program specialist for GNA, or the Good Neighbor Authority, on the Payette National Forest. So I coordinate with the various district rangers and timber management assistants to accelerate the pace of restoration on the Payette National Forest.
This area, we're actually the first GNA BLM timber sale that will be administered by the IDL. We're in the Trail Creek drainage, and it's a very productive site, and it's just awesome to be the first BLM GNA cooperation together to hopefully help the BLM have more capacity to set up these timber sales.
We're here to try to make sure that all of the agencies, partners that we're trying to pull together to work on these private landowners' properties are familiar with each other. For several of us, it's the first time that we've met in person.
We put in a lot of time going for site visits and walking people's property with them to assess their needs, their interests, and their concerns, and then tailor management to their property within a greater framework that's going to tie everything together in a healthy forest.
I work for the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We're part of the USDA, and we use Farm Bill monies to assist private landowners. With those funds, we can help tie those projects together where we've got forest lands, federal forest lands and state forest lands getting work done, and maybe there's a private landowner in the middle that maybe we can be that avenue for them to help get some forest management done and tie those acres together between all the parcels.
We are all here for the same effort, and that's hazardous fuel treatment and making our communities more safe against wildfire.
Not managing your forest, there is a fire hazard, and my neighbor, what he does impacts me. What I do impacts my neighbor.
Are we done?
We're waiting for the PowerPoint slides to come up.
Oh, okay.
So thank you for inviting us to join you and to bring you all up to speed with the goings-on with our Idaho Shared Stewardship efforts, both in the Good Neighbor Authority projects, as well as the cross-boundary cooperation work across the state.
Well, it's a very handsome picture you've got up there.
Well, Governor, I was actually confused. She was standing here and on the screen as well, and it was more than my poor little brain could handle.
So just a reminder that Idaho Shared Stewardship at a high level is a new, more integrated way of doing business. An interagency strategy with close cooperation, working across all the boundaries. It's really about focusing the right resources in the right places to get the most needed work done. Whether working with the National Forest to increase the pace and scale of needed treatments through our GNA program, or we're reaching out to adjacent private landowners to expand the footprint of needed treatments with our cross-boundary cooperative work. A reminder that in our 2018 Shared Stewardship Agreement, we set a goal of doubling the acres treated on Idaho's national forests by 2025. Using 50,000 acres as our baseline measure, in the 3 federal fiscal years since we signed the agreement, the annual average acres treated on all 7 national forests is over 61,000 acres per year, an approximate 22% increase. In federal fiscal year 21, Idaho's national forests completed treatments on over 44,000 acres and placed 72,800 acres under contract. In 2019, we designated 2 shared stewardship priority landscapes, one in the north, one in the south, where we're focusing many of our resources. But these are not the only places that we're doing cross-boundary projects. We're expanding the strategy of shared stewardship forest management into initial discussions with all 7 national forests in Idaho to explore the opportunities for cross-boundary fuel reduction projects and enhancement treatments on the national forest with our GNA resources. Now, John's going to give you a snapshot of just how much GNA has increased the pace and scale of harvesting and needed work on federal forest lands.
Good morning, Governor Little, members of the board. For the record, I'm John Songster, our Good Neighbor Bureau Chief. The Good Neighbor Authority is one of the key tools behind the shared stewardship strategy. GNA leverages the efficiency of state processes and provides an added boost of capacity from the private sector. Over the past 5 years, IDL has been a national leader in the use of Good Neighbor, helping to inform national policy and new legislation to increase GNA's effectiveness. The department's Good Neighbor Bureau is dedicated to working with federal land managers to reduce the threat of wildfire and improving conditions on lands administered by the Bureau of Land Management and 5 of the 7 national forests in Idaho. A wide range of restoration services are authorized under Good Neighbor, including the administration of timber sales on federal lands. To date, the department has awarded 27 sales to implement treatments aimed at reducing fire severity and improving forest health on more than 8,000 acres. Revenues from the sale of approximately 88 million board feet of timber are being used to offset the state's costs and fund additional work on the forests from which they were generated. As restoration work has ramped up on the national forests in Idaho, so too have the output of forest products. The total annual timber volume sold from partnering national forests has increased by 30% over the past 5 years. GNA timber sales accounted for roughly 10% of the total volume sold from these forests in fiscal year 21. In addition to the administration of these sales, the program also provides staff and contracted resources to assist with project planning and field work to support conventional non-GNA Forest Service timber sales. The GNA program was initiated using contributions from the Forest Service, the forest products industry, and the Idaho legislature. The department set a goal of developing a program sustained by revenues from restoration-focused timber sales within 5 years. That goal was reached this past year on all national forests with dedicated GNA staff, and a pipeline of commercial projects is in place to fund the program in perpetuity. The private sector is delivering added capacity and specialized resources to advance shared stewardship through GNA. To date, the program has awarded more than 100 contracts totaling nearly $5 million to expedite project planning and implement a wide range of management activities on federal lands.
So in our northern priority landscape, Jeff Lau, our shared regional shared stewardship coordinator, orchestrates all of the cross-boundary work. We are so fortunate to have this Panhandle National Forest staff member in our IDL office. He has been critical to the successes we've experienced in Idaho, incubating all of our projects. And this type of shared position is possible because of our allocation of shared stewardship state funds we've had over the last 2 years. In the northern priority landscape, over the last year, over 2,900 acres of the Panhandle National Forest were harvested, thinned, or received some type of fuels reduction treatments, with close to 500 of those acres being administered by IDL's GNA foresters. Around the Panhandle Forest Project, we've had over 7,000 acres harvested or treated on state endowment lands throughout IDL's whole Pend Oreille Lake supervisory area, with 2,000 of those state land acres being within this northern priority landscape. On non-industrial private lands in Bonner County, over 170 acres have been treated using our fire mitigation grant funds, and another 71 acres right now are in the NRCS EQIP application queue to receive funding to do these treatments in 2022. So here in the North Panhandle, we've been working with the National Forest to increase their capacity by implementing GNA operations throughout the whole region, while our cross-boundary project areas have focused primarily on Bonner County, where we're really focusing on lands intermingled among these Panhandle National Forest scattered lands projects, identified here on the map with the diagonal hash marks. Over 7,000 acres of these scattered lands federal parcels are planned to be treated over the next 5 years, with GNA administering all of these treatments. In the scattered lands cross-boundary focal area in southwest Bonner County, we have several areas of interested private landowners where fuels treatments projects have started or will soon start. And we just learned that this shared stewardship focal area has been selected to receive a Joint Chiefs Grant Award to further enhance our cross-boundary treatment efforts. So how do we get this work done? What does our North Idaho Shared Stewardship Coordinator, Jeff Lau, orchestrate to get all these private landowners on board? It takes a village of close interorganization cooperation. Here's just a partial list of all the organizations that are working in close collaboration to provide landowner assistance and get treatments done on private lands in this Bonner County area. And we're all working together with U of I Forestry Extension to offer additional forest stewardship classes to these targeted landowners. And most recently, Avista Corporation, the primary utility serving eastern Washington and most of North Idaho, has agreed to help fund fuel reduction treatments on private lands around their distribution and transmission lines in Bonner County, further protecting the communities and homes in this area. And it's important to note that the top 3 listed partners on this list are possible because their positions, at least in part, are supported with state shared stewardship funds. We've targeted education and outreach to specific landowners whose forested parcels are located strategically close to the treatments being done on the National Forest. Here, interspersed among those scattered lands federal project treatments, are 4 developments or neighborhood communities where we're focusing our outreach and landowner assistance efforts. This includes the Blanchard area, where we're addressing landowners' needed treatments after the Hunter 2 fire threatened many of these homes and neighborhoods in 2020. So how do we effectively do outreach to these private family forest landowners? One way is piggybacking on the successful messaging already being sent out by the Idaho Forest Products Commission. We completed 4 mail-outs of these informational postcards statewide, giving forest landowners an easy way to let us know that they wanted to join their private forests with this effort. A postage-paid tear-off mail-back postcard only needed to be dropped in the mail, and follow-up emails and landowner assistance would come quickly. With our initial mail-out in this Bonner County area, we had a 97% favorable response rate from private landowners. So how do all these landowner assisting foresters from multiple organizations keep track of what the others are doing? All shared stewardship team members can communicate landowner assistance progress through an IDL-created geodatabase accessible by all partners, by all the organizations through ArcGIS Online. This has been a critical piece of interagency communication within these shared stewardship teams. When the shared stewardship working group all comes together, working towards the same goals, here's how we know it's working. The treatments get done on the ground on all the forest lands, like these private acres treated up in Bonner County, or unplanned and unbudgeted fuels reduction work is needed on our state forest lands. This is work completed last summer on state endowment lands up in our Clagstone unit in the same scattered lands cross-boundary area, where an unexpected windstorm created a big pileup of blown down timber, creating a massive fuels buildup on 70 acres of productive forest land. Or on this ongoing 160-acre Carywood GNA salvage sale on the Panhandle National Forest in the same Bonner County area. Although this sale is removing primarily small diameter timber, it's expected to generate over $100,000 in receipts that will fund additional fuels treatments on other tracts of the National Forest.
To the south of our northern priority landscape, IDL is working in coordination with the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest to remove and rehab fire containment lines constructed during the suppression of last summer's Leland complex. Operations were completed this past fall to stabilize slopes and salvage close to 2 million board feet of felled trees from roughly 5 miles of fire control lines. Last month, the G&A program awarded the first of 2 deck sales, which will yield close to $1 million in revenues to support additional restoration work in the area affected by the fire. In the South Priority landscape from the Boise National Forest, and equally critical to the success of our cross-boundary projects, is our Shared Stewardship Coordinator, Lynn Oliver. Over the last year, the Boise and Payette National Forest completed harvesting or fuels reduction on over 12,000 acres in the Southern Priority landscape. About 1,000 of those acres were administered by the Department of Lands through G&A. And in addition, the Payette Lake Supervisory Area treated over 4,000 acres of endowment lands. And using our fire mitigation grant funds, about 100 acres of neighboring private forest lands have been treated in Valley County. Currently, we also have, NRCS has 6 EQIP contracts providing treatments on 795 acres of private land and about 570 additional acres in the queue for later this year. A Joint Chiefs landscape restoration proposal has been submitted for the Highway 95 corridor project adjacent to the Payette National Forest. The Joint Chiefs partnership enables the NRCS and the Forest Service to invest in cross-boundary projects that would further protect watersheds and reduce wildfire threats in this area. This focal area also includes the Bureau of Land Management's Boulder Creek project, where about 350 acres will be treated through the first G&A timber sale on BLM lands in Idaho. Providing highly visible thinning and fuel breaks as demonstration sites is the best way to market these treatments to landowners and expand management activities to private lands, like the 2,500 acre Circle C neighborhood. Our interagency shared stewardship team is currently working with 4 landowners to complete fuels reduction treatments to demonstrate active management and extend this work to dozens of other homeowners in the Circle C development. South of Circle C, harvest operations are in progress on the Payette National Forest between New Meadows and McCall. The Rocky Goose G&A sale will improve conditions on 630 acres and generate 4.5 million board feet of forest products. This work is part of the Little Red Goose project, which includes up to 3,000 acres of thinning and prescribed fire to improve forest resiliency and reduce the threat of a large-scale beetle outbreak. Using fire mitigation grant funds, about 40 acres of DEQ lands adjacent to Tamarack Ski Resort were also mechanically thinned this past year. And this is yet another educational demonstration site to promote fuels treatments to more than 300 private landowners in the Tamarack neighborhood. And just to the south of Tamarack, the French Hazard Project includes thinning, mastication, and prescribed burning treatments that will reduce fuels and the risk of crown fire spreading within the urban interface on the west side of Cascade Reservoir. This past year, the first of these treatments was completed through the 275-acre Willow South G&A sale. And then further south on the Boise National Forest, IDL is currently conducting timber removal operations on the south side G&A sale as part of the Sagehen Integrated Restoration Project. A range of silvicultural treatments and prescribed fire will improve forest conditions and restore watershed functions in this area, which was heavily impacted by the 2019 Douglas fir tussock moth outbreak.
So in closing, we invite all of you to view more details and explanations of our project work across the state by visiting our No Boundaries Forestry web pages on our IDL website. We have interactive story map tours and links to videos and spatial risk analyses that can really tell the full story of our shared stewardship and G&A successes. Thank you, and with that, we'll entertain questions.
Governor.
General.
I suspect that the Department of Land doesn't go out trouncing through the National Forest and say, we're going to have a Good Neighbor Authority project here. So take me through the process of how it's identified, who does what, and how do we get to the end result? Simple, small mind,
Sure.
Short person, help me out.
Governor, members of the board, General Wasden, what we typically do is meet periodically throughout the year with our partners to review and consider proposed projects to be organized and executed through the program. Typically, that also involves some field visits with our staff, and at some point we make a determination whether that's a good fit for the program, and then we also determine what parts the state is going to do and what parts the Forest Service is going to retain, and then we identify those different pieces of the project in our agreement, and then we move forth with the project and continue to check in throughout the planning and preparation and execution of those projects.
It's a follow-up, Governor.
General.
So in identifying the parcel, the federal government, they will say, hey, here's some things we think. You all then go and study that and say, oh, yeah, we think that's good, or we think it's not good. That doesn't dissipate the requirement that the federal government do its work on its own. I mean, ESA and all the other kind of stuff that it has to do, right? And so then they're doing their work, and we're saying, okay, but we've got some expertise here that we can bring to bear that helps get this project done. And that's really what we're doing, correct?
General Wasden, that is correct. All of the federal policies and laws still apply to these projects, and so we just negotiate on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
How we're going to execute
And
the
I
work.
was going to include NEPA and all that other stuff that they have to do. So they're doing their thing, and we're saying, hey, we've got some expertise that we can bring to bear and some available resources, and we can help apply this, the mechanical thinning or whatever the process may be, that will then end up in a better managed federal forest, but we also then benefit us as well because we are the neighboring property and all the other kinds of things that go with it. That's my understanding. Is that correct?
General Watson, that is correct.
Okay.
And our intent is to be, additive with these projects and bring
Excellent.
additional resources to
Excellent.
the table to do more.
One other follow-up, and that is, I think back, I'm going to use the word nominated because I don't know what else to use, about 1.8 million acres, something like that, and then the federal government added another 4.3, we ended at about 6.1 that was originally designated. And I don't know whether we're limited to that or we have other projects that can be added on. So help me with that part.
Yeah, Governor, members of the board, General Watson, that designation, we don't have to stick to just those designated areas. It does allow for a categorical exclusion, which is an abbreviated NEPA process.
Okay, thank you very much.
Further questions?
Governor, just for a comment. I just want to say thank you for being here. I know I got to come up north and sit down with you all on your stomping ground and hear about this. And we as land board members often get questions about the land management. And so I think you did a really good job. It's very professional, and thanks for all you do on our behalf.
Thank you, Governor.
Controller.
I'm going to go back to page 8 that has I like the numbers part, but you have the program costs, the sales revenue for 21, the current cash balance, and the sale revenue. I guess one of the things maybe to help myself and other board members is having an understanding of the distributions after you get the receipts from the sales. What takes place? I mean, what's the distribution? What's the allocation that is divvied out? I mean, how much goes back? And then on slide 9, it talks about these restoration service contracts, and I don't know if those are over the whole time frame of the project or if that's a one fiscal year, and maybe you can answer that. But I guess I'd like something, maybe not for today, but in the future, if you could provide us a copy of how those distributions work, where the allocation, if it's a percentage or how you divvy and budget that out, would be helpful for us.
Yeah, Governor, members of the board, Controller Wolf, we can absolutely do that.
It'd be helpful for me if you tie slide 8 to slide 9, because if that would be helpful. I guess my question is, tell us what we can do either individually or collectively at the board to scale this up. We're a long way from getting to 6 million acres. We're a long way from getting to 1.8 million acres. What are the impediments to even getting fractionally closer to that?
Governor, members
Besides
of the
money,
members of the board, there are various bottlenecks in the system in doing more. Agency staff is a bottleneck at times for both IDL and our federal partners. Contracting capacity is certainly an issue, but the number one bottleneck that I continue to go back to is just the planning bottleneck is typically what we're up against on the federal side.
Well, I was under the impression that both GNA and shared stewardship, that we were supposed to get our way through NEPA faster because the state and the state contractors could do it faster. Is that, I mean, that was the whole genesis of both those programs. Because the feds weren't getting their work done. We were on all our state land. We could get it done faster. What's the problem?
Governor, members of the board, that, as you saw on the one slide there, the pie chart, that is really an important way that we're helping is through contracted resources to help with project planning. To date, we've spent over $3 million in contracted resources, and oftentimes we're supplementing that federal NEPA team with 1 or 2 positions to keep those projects on track. And I really feel that's something we need to continue to do as we move forward.
Well, I guess what's the friction? What's the sand in the wheels of getting that done? Is it just lack of interest by the forest supervisors? Is it the regional forest office? What's the hang up?
Governor, members of the board, I would say that the biggest hang up is just the capacity, probably on the federal side, as well as on the state side. There's just only so many people available to take on those projects and move them forward. And NEPA and project planning isn't really in our wheelhouse, so we are reliant on assistance from our partners in that area.
Okay.
Just to add to that a little bit, Governor, members of the Land Board, on doing the cross-boundary work, one of the additional, besides the limited pool of operators and contractors, the additional hang-up for us is finding counties, entities that can take our grant money or our state shared stewardship funds and put it on the ground. They are able to report back to us to receive those monies and able to contract out the operators and do the agreements for liability purposes with the landowners. That's what we're having some hold up with. Who can accept our granted funds and get it on the ground?
Send us a list.
Governor?
Just for a comment, I just want to say congratulations on being self-sustaining. I think that's the thing that we looked at. We had great partnership from all levels, including the private industrial services as well as the state putting in seed money to get this, and it's great to see that we're at that point. So along with the other board members, kudos, and continue to what we can do to help as individuals and as board members to help continue this process.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Governor?
Thank you.
General?
My thanks as well, but I did want to make record of the fact that there was a interruption with the Idaho Public TV stream during this presentation. It was only a couple of minutes that used the Zoom presentation and the YouTube were both up and running. I just wanted to make a record of that. This is not an action item. No action was taken, nor would action be taken. I just wanted to make a record of that.
You don't want on record those secret votes we took while we were...
No, that's correct, Governor, that's correct.
Okay. Well, thank you, Governor.
That was a joke, by the way.
Well, thank you, Governor, and I too appreciate the work of both John and Ara and our state forester and their leadership that they've shown coordinating through all of this across the landscape and really getting at the treatments that we need on the ground, which goes hand in hand with the fire suppression piece. So thank you for your support for these programs. Okay, now on to tab 9 on the information agenda. This is a presentation from the Office of the Attorney General. We have Daryl Early here and the University of Idaho regarding the Morrill Act and the use of the Caldwell Property Disposition Funds. We also have, I want to recognize President Green, President of the University of Idaho, here in attendance. So welcome, Mr. President. And Governor, I can turn the time over to Mr. Early.
Daryl.
Governor, members of the board, for the record, Daryl Early from the Office of the Attorney General. Here today to give you a brief presentation. I know how much you love to listen to lawyers talk, so I'm going to try and keep this very short.
There's one that I like to, but the rest.
I appreciate that. This is a brief presentation on sort of the legal landscape applicable to the use of the proceeds from the sale of the Caldwell property. As you'll recall, this fall, the board authorized and the department executed the sale of some land out in Caldwell that netted somewhere in the neighborhood of about $20 million. That is money that is now held in the land bank, and it is for the use of the Agricultural College Endowments Fund. This presentation is to give you the legal landscape of what can be done with that monies in light of the presentation you're going to hear from the University of Idaho about what they would like you to do with that money. This presentation will essentially address three fundamental questions. What can you do with the money legally? What should you do and what standards apply to your decision making? And then ultimately, how do you go about effectuating that decision? I'll give you a brief history to start with. The Morrill Act of 1862 created the land-grant colleges and provided basically that for each member of Congress, senator and representative, each state coming into the Union would receive approximately 30,000 acres in land. So Idaho, upon statehood, received roughly 90,000 acres in land for the benefit of the University of, or the Agricultural College, which ultimately is the University of Idaho. The Morrill Act had a couple of key pieces in it. The original Morrill Act provided that if any of these lands were sold, the proceeds of the sale of those lands would go into a permanent endowment fund. But it provided that 10% per year could be used to buy or purchase sites or experimental farms. And the specific language says, except that a sum not exceeding 10% upon received by any state under the provisions of this chapter may be expended for the purchase of lands for sites or experimental farms whenever authorized by the respective legislatures of said states. And then further, it provided that no portion of said fund, nor the interest thereon, shall be applied directly or indirectly under any pretense whatever to the purchase, erection, preservation, or repair of any building or buildings. So the original act said you can buy land, but you can't build buildings with it, and you can only spend 10% a year. And it had to be authorized by the respective state legislator. That Morrill Act, when Idaho became law, was adopted and ratified by the Idaho State Legislature and by our Constitution in the admissions bill. The admissions bill provides that any lands granted under this shall be held, appropriated, and disposed of exclusively for the purposes herein mentioned in such manner as the legislature may provide. And in Article 9, Section 8 of the Constitution, it directs that the State Board of Land Commissioners shall provide for the location, protection, sale, or rental of all lands heretofore or which may hereafter be granted or acquired by the state from the general government under such regulations as may be prescribed by law and in such manner as will secure the maximum long-term financial return to the institution to which granted. Those documents, those laws, basically are the fundamental trust documents that you all operate under with respect to these lands and this decision. In 2007, Congress amended the admissions bill. It did not amend the Morrill Act. The original plan was to actually amend the Morrill Act, but when it got back to Congress, apparently it ran into some headwinds in terms of amending the actual Morrill Act, and so instead they amended the admissions bill of Idaho to allow and to remove the limitations that I just spoke of with respect to the 10% cap and the limitation on not being able to use it to build buildings. So the 2007 amendments allow you to invest and manage the earnings and proceeds derived from land in accordance with standards applicable to a trustee under law. So that provision reaffirms your obligations as a trustee. And then it says you can deduct and pay expenses. And then it says use earnings and proceeds generated by the grant for any uses prescribed without regard to the limitations set out in Section 5 that prohibit the state from exceeding 10% for the purchase of land and prohibit the state from purchasing, erecting, preserving, or repairing any building or buildings. So basically, as the trust stands now today, as the trust instruments now stand, the board is empowered to expend the proceeds from the sale without any limitation on how much it spends, and it is now authorized under the terms of the trust to construct or erect or preserve buildings or buildings. But the trust still has those other overlays of the trust responsibilities to manage these proceeds for the maximum long-term benefit of the institution to which granted. As you'll hear from in a few moments from the University of Idaho, the university would like to use some proceeds, some or all of the proceeds from the recently completed Caldwell property that are now in the land bank for various purposes, including, and I think the majority of the presentation today is about the Cafe Experimental Farm. So the questions are, can you, and clearly the law has been made such that you can spend these monies to purchase land or build buildings for a site or an experimental farm pursuant to acts of the legislature. Now that brings up one fine point of this. The question that we looked at was whether or not the legislature has authorized the expenditure of these monies in any way, shape, or form. The general law of Idaho that's passed by the legislature in Idaho Code 58-133 specifically allows you as the land board the general power to acquire lands, purchase, and otherwise deal in real estate. So in that sense, you have legislative authorization as a general matter. The language of the Moral Act might suggest and could be interpreted to require a more specific piece of legislation directing your actions with respect to a specific purchase. And in that regard, we note that House Bill, in the 2007 legislative session, House Bill 325 specifically authorized the expenditure of appropriated funds and also spoke about the board's authority to use proceeds to build what was then referred to as I believe it's called the CLES, the Center for Livestock and Environmental Studies, which is basically, as I understand it, the predecessor to what we now talk about as CAFE. So with respect to CAFE and projects associated with that, it's my belief that we have specific legislative authorizations, so we don't have to rely on that general authority under 58-133. It might be prudent if there are other projects, and we've in staff conversations had some discussions that perhaps the university might have other ideas for other places to spend some of this money. It might be prudent to look at that issue and discuss whether or not specific legislative authority might be appropriate if the board decides to use some of these proceeds for something other than CAFE. So those are the limitations. That's the can you portion of this presentation, and the answer is definitively yes, you can do this to spend the money on the CAFE.
Daryl, 15 years ago is a long time, but I remember working with Clive on this, but we can indubitably buy land, yes. No question about that. And then maybe laboratory, but the specific language in the Moral Act, which we didn't amend, is still, and this is my question, is what about an administration building or administration office? Because that's what they were getting at, when they passed the Moral Act, was that we not build administration buildings. The Moral Act lands were designated for research, and that's what they wanted. Where's the line between what we can build? Can we build a classroom? Can we build administration? What's your opinion? And I think I could find some emails from Clive if I could go back 15 years into my records about where that line is.
Governor, members of the board, that's a very good question. The Moral Act says you can spend the money for sites or experimental farms, and it does not define what a site is or an experimental farm. I think it's within the discretion of the board to look at the intention of the Moral Act as originally enacted. What the amendments did was they removed the prohibition on building buildings at all. It was clear that the original act was simply to buy land.
And the 10% cap.
And the 10% cap. We have the ability now to build buildings. What kind of buildings and for what purposes, I think, is still governed by that site's and experimental farms piece of this. My understanding from what the preview I've seen of the presentation, the university is formulating specific proposals that it will ultimately bring back. The reason we're on the information agenda today is because they don't have specific proposals today. But we will have to answer that question at that time.
But I guess my question for the rest of the board is, how do we, rather than say, oh, you know you can't do that, how do we, where's the moral act challenge line that we can say, with great confidence, you can go up to here, you can't go here, there might be some gray area in between. Is that what we're trying to get to?
That will ultimately be the question that we have to resolve when we receive the specific proposals from the university as to exactly what they are asking you to spend this money on. The easy one is buy some land. That could be what they ask from you. Another could be, I think they call it the Discovery Center, which is an interpretive center or something like that. Is that a site or an experimental farm? Is that within the meaning of the Moral Act? Those are the questions we have to look at and see, and in the university will be presenting to you about what they're thinking and along those lines.
If they have non-Moral Act land, not the proceeds from the sale at Caldwell, they can do whatever they want with that. The main thing is that we identify the moral land, that it goes into the general intent of the Moral Act.
Correct, Governor.
Thanks, Darrell.
And that's the use of their other funds is by the State Board of Education and the Board of Trustees and other statutes that govern how their monies are used, which is outside of your purview. So the second question really comes back to the question of, should you use this money for this purpose? Clearly, the legislature has indicated an intention that this money be used for the purpose of building this facility, but the ultimate decision on the use of these funds is vested with this board as a trustee. And it is governed by Article 9, Section 8 of the Idaho Constitution, which it directs you to manage the assets of these endowments for the maximum long-term financial return to the institution to which it is granted. So the question you have before you as a matter of the should you do this is it in the best interest of the institution, the University of Idaho, to use these monies in the long term? And it's important to note that this is the long-term issue. It's not the short term. It is long-term. And secondly, that it's not the endowment per se in the sense of, we look at these, we often talk about these as the endowments, but the actual language of the Constitution says the institution to which granted. So I think it is fair to talk about the long-term interests of the University of Idaho. And the final point in a major component of this decision is it is your decision. It is not the university's decision to decide what is in its best interest. They can provide you that information. They can make their recommendations to you and seek your approval on that. But ultimately, it is up to this board to make that decision in the exercise of its fiduciary responsibility. So the question you face is whether these proposed projects that you'll hear about will be in the best long-term financial return or promote the long-term financial return to the institution to which granted. And then finally, the question about how to do this. And that comes back to the question, it's intertwined with both your fiduciary responsibility and with the legal authorities we have. The Moral Act basically allows you to purchase these lands or erect these buildings for sites or experimental farms. I think it's fair to interpret that language to imply that the lands or the experimental farms can be purchased for the use of the university. The Act doesn't specifically say that. It just says for sites or experimental farms. It doesn't say for the use of the school. It's not expressed that way. But I think it's a fair interpretation to say that it can be purchased for their use. And under such an interpretation, you could authorize the use of the lands without compensation if you make the determination that that is in the best long-term interests of the institution to which granted. That in turn comes full circle to ask you, what is it you're being asked to do, and is it the right thing to do? For example, as you all know, We have been in the business for the last number of years of getting rid of split estates, buildings on lands that are owned by somebody else, our cottage sites. We've determined that that's not a great relationship to have. If the university proposes to ask you to spend money to build a building on land that is owned by somebody else, that would be a question that you would have to ask yourself. Is it in the best interests long-term to own a building on land you don't own, a depreciating asset on land that you don't own? Or is there a better use of this money? Is there a better transaction to be proposed? And I'm sure that the University of Idaho, in formulating this procedure or these proposals, will be keeping that in mind as they move forward and make these specific proposals, that they're here to convince you about that question.
Daryl, when we sold the 240 acres, is that right? It was
Yes.
240 acres, 280. When we sold the 280, I assume, was the revenue off of that, some farmer was leasing it, was it going into the into the earnings reserve and then ultimately, or was it going right to the beneficiary?
Governor,
it was going right. Mark's telling me it went right to them. So
yeah.
We've already crossed over the line that we have with all our other beneficiaries, where that revenue comes in to earnings reserve or the land bank. So the University of Idaho's lands in their trust, but that's different than some of their other lands they've got, like the land down at Mountain Home. Does that go directly to them, or does that go into the earnings reserve and thus eventually the trust?
Governor, you got me at a loss about the Mountain Home lands. I can't really speak to that
any
issue.
other University of Idaho lands.
I think that the Caldwell property was unique in that.
Of course, that was an R&E center originally.
Yes. And many years ago, an instrument was executed that granted the University of Idaho an easement to use that land, and it had a nominal payment. So they basically had an easement to use that land, and then they, as I understand it, once they quit using it themselves, started leasing it and collecting the revenues from that, going directly to
Are they still paying that easement?
The easement's been extinguished by virtue of the sale of the land. So whatever happened in the past, and to get sort of the point, whatever happened in the past is what happened in the past. The decision you have before you today is to make this decision based upon the trust instruments that you have in front of you.
It would be good for the board to know, out of the portfolio of all the real estate the University of Idaho has, and I have that somewhere also, how much of it goes to them directly, or how much that filters through the endowment and the earnings reserve, like all the other. And I had that at one time, but it's probably with Clive's emails somewhere.
Governor, I think that would be a prudent thing. My understanding, I mean, the university clearly has land that is acquired with non-moral act, was granted and acquired in other
Which
forms.
the 40 acres the Kane Center was.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And so we have these different types of ownership. I can't say specifically, because this is something probably could get some assistance from IDL, but to the extent that we have lands that are Moral Act lands, the revenue should be, any revenue from those lands should be going back to the ultimately managed by this board as a trustee, whether it's put in the permanent fund or used for some other purpose under the relevant laws. But we are dealing today with the specific issue of the sale of the Caldwell properties, and now we have this pot of money, and I'm trying to provide that legal landscape for you going forward, and we can sort out the history of the past later.
Governor.
General?
Two things. Number one, I just want to make certain that this is the informational agenda. We will not be taking an action today. We are considering information in this legal framework, but we're not going to be taking an action. And it would also seem to me that we need to have a firm proposal in order for us to examine all of the relevant legal issues that we have to deal with. So that's sort of my perspective.
Good point.
Governor.
Anybody else?
And that is the point of the reason why this is on the information agenda today, because in discussions with the university, it's clear that they have some specific ideas in mind, but they had not formulated those into fine points yet. And so I think we'll hear from the good folks from the university today more about that. I'm just here to provide that legal landscape. Again, you can also make the decision, that leasing the land is in the best interest. So again, this is your discretion to make that determination based upon that standard of long-term return to the institution to which granted. So again, I think it's appropriate for us to look at those issues at the time we have those proposals in front of the board and make those decisions as a fiduciary. But you have a great deal of discretion in how you go about doing that. And that's basically the 3 points I wanted to make in this presentation. And if you have any questions, I will stand.
Thanks, Mr. Early. Unless anybody have other questions. Okay, Mark, are you up? President Green. Oh, you're bringing in the heavyweights, Mark. Good for you.
Governor, board members, I won't, take too much of your time here, but I'm Scott Green, for the record, president of the University of Idaho, and I am joined by our leaders of our College of Agriculture and Life Science, who will share our vision for building on our university's legacy of supporting Idaho agriculture. This plan will help provide a sustainable future for one of our state's top industries and produce a long-term maximum return on investment for our University of Idaho. We all agree about the importance of agriculture in Idaho, and maybe we could move to the next slide here. But in 2019, we had nearly 25,000 farms and ranches in our state, and they generated more than $25 billion in sales. The University of Idaho has long been a driver of agriculture in the state. The Idaho Agriculture Experiment Station opened in 1892 before the university welcomed any of its first students to Moscow. And since then, we've opened research, extension, and education centers across the state and met the needs of Idaho industry and private citizens through our research and outreach. The Center for Agriculture, Food, and the Environment, or CAFE, is our newest center and will be the country's largest experimental dairy and farm complex. Located in the Magic Valley, CAFE will be a leader in addressing water usage and environmental quality challenges, enabling the sustained growth of our dairy, livestock, cropland, and food processing industries. We've developed a plan for the center that will result in dynamic research, training, education to develop solutions to our state's complex challenges, and our students will benefit by having access to a world-class facility where they'll gain hands-on experience working with the latest agricultural technologies, and Idaho industry will gain access to the latest advancements in research and agricultural practices shared through our extension network. And the state stands to gain from increased agricultural productivity and sustainability. Since planning began in 2020, CAFE has already garnered nearly $13 million in grant funding and more than $7.5 million in gifts. We're confident this funding will grow as the full vision for CAFE is realized. We ask that you invest in the future of the University of Idaho and our state's farms and ranches by supporting our plans for the center. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mark Mcguire, our Associate Dean of Research and Director of the Idaho Agriculture Experiment Station, who's going to share more about CAFE with you.
Governor.
General.
I don't know that I've had an opportunity to publicly welcome you back to the state of Idaho, but welcome back. Welcome to be the president of my alma mater, the University of Idaho. So I'm so glad to see you back, and I'm grateful for what you do.
It's great to be home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, General.
Thank you. He's kind of an old hand now. Mcguire.
Governor, Commissioners, it's my pleasure to be here this morning. I'm Mark Mcguire, the Director of the Idaho Agricultural Experiment Station. As in this position as a part of the CAL's leadership who manages the research and extension centers, otherwise known as our experimental farms throughout the state. I'm sorry the map kind of got cut off there, but this map shows our research and extension centers that go essentially across the entire breadth and width of Idaho and really try to represent the various climates and growing conditions to support agriculture in Idaho.
How old is this map? You got the Caldwell R&E Center on there.
Well, there are people there, Governor, so it really maybe doesn't reflect experimental farms.
In the building,
Correct.
Didn't we sell that?
No, we still have the
Farm ground
Caldwell
across the road.
RNC right
So
across from the
R&E
feedlot.
center's still there?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So one highlight of this is that we have a lot of land for potato production, sugar beets, wheat and barley, but we really aren't necessarily reflective of the major commodity in Idaho, and that is milk and dairy. And so, if you're not aware, the dairy industry is number 3 in the nation. It is the top commodity in Idaho, and we have 100 cows, and they're in Moscow. That dairy in Moscow does a good job of educating students and does some basic research, but it doesn't reflect the dairy industry, which is predominantly in the Magic Valley. And so to be more reflective of Idaho, we need an experimental farm to really address the dairy industry. So it has been described that we're today talking about Idaho Cafe, the Center for Agriculture, Food, and the Environment. It's a regional model that includes a research dairy and our experimental farm in Rupert. It includes a discovery center at the crossroads of 84 and 93, which is an outreach center, but it also has some laboratory facilities, we hope, and then a food processing pilot plant in collaboration with the College of Southern Idaho. Today, I'm only going to focus on the dairy portion, the experimental farm portion. We have approval for the design and recently go out to construction bid for the research dairy at Rupert. The design is through Keller Associates, and the construction will be McGuire companies, 2 Idaho companies that are leading us in the design of this experimental research dairy that has, while it's a commercial dairy in many cases, it is an experimental farm because we have to be able to figure out how to look forward to the future and meet the needs of the dairy industry and agriculture in general. This experimental dairy will be located on 640 acres north of Rupert, and it is on land that was purchased by the university in March of 2019. There's 320 acres, 2 pivots to the north are owned by the University of Idaho, and the 2 pivots to the south were purchased in partnership with the Idaho Dairymen's Association. They're owned by the IDA at this point, reflecting the industry's desire to have a research facility to address their needs. An experimental farm that is critical to making sure that that dairy industry and agriculture in total is sustainable in Idaho. A quick overview shows the design of the current design of the facilities, which include dry land space, dry lot space for dairy cows, which reflects the dairy industry, and a cross-ventilated barn, which also reflects the future of the dairy industry in Idaho. And I'm going to drill down into looking at the phased approach that we have for the development of this facility. Phase 1 is the building of a milking parlor that will support milking 2,000 cows a day. This parlor is, again, I'll show you shortly, has a combination of state funds and university funds, and it will go out to construction bid here in a month. There are also excavation that will be necessary at the site to ensure that we have the appropriate grading for the dry lots, calving and research barn, and the manure handling system, which is critical to not only the functioning of the dairy, but also to the research opportunities that are there to really conduct experiments on the opportunities for economic value for the dairy industry, and to examine, if you will, the nutrient qualities that would enhance agronomic production and potentially improve soil carbon and soil health. The cross-ventilated barn for approximately 1,200 cows is currently designed in phase 3 of construction. Also note there that there are research ponds and a manure processing facility that is designed so that it can be plug and play, that we can test out new technologies for the industry to determine whether or not it has economic value. A methane digester could be installed. It does not have to be. Those research ponds, though, are critical to examining whether or not we have the appropriate liners to make sure that there are no nutrients being leaked out of ponds. And this is really in partnership with Idaho Dairymen's Association. They really demand it so that we can get the proper information to guide best management practices. As I said, the university is already engaged in the building of the milking system. We have contracted with De Laval and Total Dairy Solutions out of Jerome for a 60-cow rotary parlor. This is the most current experimental parlor, if you will, from De Laval, and so it will be the forefront of our milking system. It will be housed in this $6 million estimated cost of the milking barn. This is really just a commercial dairy facility at this point.
Governor,
General.
how do you convince 60 cows to get on that rotary scale at the same time?
It's actually, Attorney General, Governor, it's amazing to watch cows enter a rotary parlor. It's like it's a fun time for the day for them compared to a parallel parlor. They don't hesitate. They just walk right on there, take their little one trip around, and it's like, hey, that was a fun day, you know. So it is amazing to watch cows enter. And you can't quite see it in this facility, but I'd be more happy to have you sit in the observation deck and watch those cows enter and exit. It's really a fun experience. Yeah. So this barn has been designed specifically for this rotary parlor. Estimated cost is $6 million. Again, it's going out to bid in about a month. It is essentially a commercial milking parlor, milking system, but it will have some additional electronics, animal ID that will allow us to do some extra experiments tied to milk yield and milk composition. Besides the milking system, we are already conducting a fair bit of research on those existing pivots that are there. This research is really tied to understanding the flow of nutrients through the soils. And over the past 3 years, since obtaining ownership of that land and also on the IDA property, the soils has been extensively sampled on a 0.6 acre grid to analyze the chemistries, the depth of bedrock, the nutrients that are there before there's any manure application or manure byproduct application. This also gives us a good baseline to set up our experimental plots for research purposes so that we don't have any biases that we didn't understand. For example, we've taken off nearly 2 tons of soil off of each of these pivots for analyses to understand what the baseline values are. The irrigation pivots have also been upgraded substantially so that this facility will be a sensor-centric facility for precision agriculture. We are going to have real-time information on evaporation of water from plants, soil moisture, and be able to target precisely the delivery of water so that we can protect that important natural resource for Idaho. So not only the dairy, but those lands are going to be used extensively and are being used extensively as an experimental farm. So just to quickly summarize the development of CAFE, there currently is 640 acres at the property. The university owns 320 acres. The Idaho Dairymen's Association owns 2 pivots or 320 acres. I will note there is an agreement with Idaho Dairymen's Association that those 320 acres will be donated to the university when CAFE is operational, and the definition of operational is we milk 100 cows 30 days at that facility. We are working on those construction improvements. We will have a fully operational experimental dairy that will be the largest research dairy in the United States on the basis of the number of cows. Now that may sound extravagant, but realize that we have to have enough cows to be scientifically valid. So we need to have a substantial number of cows to do some of the work with regards to animal health, animal welfare, as well as to make sure that we can replicate information as far as the manure process or air emissions. And in particular, our focus will be on the dry lot housed cows and on the emissions that are there, where there's really very poor information in the literature to guide federal authorities in the regulation. Again, our experimental dairy waste system will be the most advanced so that we can do plug and play and really address the sustainability of the dairy industry. And finally, we will be working on precision agriculture on that experimental farm for all the commodities that are present. For as returns to date, we've received nearly $8 million in gifts from industry for the sustainable growth of agriculture, dairy food processing sector, and that's tied to CAFE. One of the major donors is Anheuser-Busch. They've given $400,000 at this time to really focus in on malt barley production, where Idaho is the #1 grower in the nation. Why are they doing that? It's because they want to make sure that they can say that the malt barley that's grown in Idaho is the most sustainable possible. And so we need to tie together not only dairy manure, commercial fertilizer with malt barley production in the rotations that are typical over in southeastern Idaho. University faculty have received grants of over $13 million in the past 3 years, either directly or indirectly tied to efforts at CAFE. These grants will only become more readily available when we actually have cows on the facility and we can utilize those cows for research. Those grants are restricted funds for specific research purposes, though, and cannot be used for building buildings. Enrollment growth is a critical part of CAFE. We're having an experimental dairy in Rupert will attract more students. Those grants immediately have already employed 30 more graduate students for their research purposes, and they also employ undergraduates as research assistants. So we will have a substantial amount of education, if you will, on site that is coincident to the experiments that will be conducted at CAFE. And finally, there's already been a field day where producers and growers have been there to look at this precision agriculture piece and understand the value of it and the sustainability of agriculture. Okay, so this slide, I'm going to try to walk you through the slide real quickly. It lists the costs of the different phases of development of the CAFE approach and includes the various funding sources that are there. The top line is the purchase of the land, which was a partnership between the university, again, owning the 2 North Pivots, and Idaho Dairymen's Association, and the family who sold the land as a part of donation. Phase 1 is that milking system and barn, and it is also coupled with excavation of the site to prepare for the dry lots, for the manure handling system, et cetera. It's estimated to cost about $12 million. $10 million is coming from the state of Idaho through the Permanent Building Fund, and $2 million is from the university contribution in purchasing the milking system from De La Valle and Total Dairy Solutions. Phase 2, which would ultimately get us cows on site, is the final development of those dry lots, shade structures, feed lanes, the manure system, which is critical for the research that will be done there, the feed preparation area, a calving barn, and then the farm office, which will have classroom potential and outreach potential, but will be mostly directed towards those researchers that are housed on site. We have approximately a $13 million estimated cost there, of which we have about $5 million in donations towards that. So we have a deficit of about $8 million for Phase 2 completion at this point. In Phase 3, we're looking at a cross-ventilated barn and equipment storage at a cost of about $10 million. And then in Phase 4, we should purchase some additional land in the area for nutrient management. Conservative estimate is that the 640 acres is approximately $6 million at this point in time. I've italicized in this slide what is land and what are buildings if we would move forward with a proposal to use. So our current needs are approximately $24 million, although fundraising is still quite active and is looking to continues to be quite successful. So what is the impact of the sale of the Caldwell R&E Center on the College of Ag endowment distributions? The sale was $23.25 million. From the endowment officials, our estimated annual distribution will be 5%, representing an increase to the College of Ag of approximately million a year. If we take into mind here what is the maximum long-term financial return to the College of Ag, there may be an alternative, and that is that could be a partnership with the land board to invest directly in those facilities. We believe that completion of the full cafe experimental farm will be delayed if we don't have a partnership with the land board. And we conservatively estimate, based upon grants, gifts, student enrollment, outreach, et cetera, that we will annually return $3.5 million a year based upon completion of the cafe project. So about a threefold improvement in return on investment with partnership. So in conclusion, with your guidance, we will develop a proposal for land board's participation in cafe that will provide the best long-term financial return to the College of Agriculture. Thank you, Governor.
Questions?
Commissioners.
Governor,
General?
I look forward to your presentation when it's all final and put together. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General.
Controller, did you have a question?
Just more of a disclaimer, maybe with the Secretary of State, that we've spent a lot of time with the little black and whites. And also, I guess, disclaimer, having hauled milk and milked for a long time, just that disclaimer that I'll keep my bias and be independent in my thoughts here. Having hauled milk for another college and hauled their milk actually from their research dairy at Utah State up to their creamery, so.
Does that mean you never want to see another cow?
I just don't want to get up at 4:30 and milk anymore. So I'm grateful that maybe they'll have robots on this rotary, and we'll go forward from
Duly
there.
noted. Renee, be sure to put that.
No, I do. I look forward to
Further
this.
questions? Well, I think, Mark, I think Daryl, you got the tone from Daryl, some of the issues that, and I think General Wasden alluded to that about what the next steps are. So it was convenient. You needed 24 million, and we had 24 million. That didn't go by me. So
Math works sometimes.
all right, all right. Anything else,
Governor? That concludes the agenda for the day.
General?
I move for adjournment.
Moved to second, we adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We are adjourned. Renee's pretty good at estimating the time on these things.